What's up, everybody? I'm Jason Mayfield. Welcome back to the Mega Question and Answer session. We're continuing this week with some more questions, and without further delay, let's get into them now.
I know you use the ESV and NASB, but what are your thoughts on the CSB?
So here's my deal on the Christian Standard Bible, the CSB. What I've read about the translation philosophy, I really like, that they just took the manuscripts and they translated it again. I think that is, really a great philosophy approach. I do think there is benefit in the building blocks, like the New American Standard updates and the ESV updates. I just wish they'd space them out about 10 more years. But, even the NIV updates, I think there's a benefit in the building on previous translations. But there's also something really to be said. We're going to translate this thing from scratch. And honestly, what they probably ought to do, and this isn't CSB, or there probably ought to be someone who comes along and does the same thing, and they do two translation teams. We want you guys to translate it from scratch. We want you guys to update this version that we really like the language flow of, and then they come back and they kind of go verse by verse and word by word and evaluate the two and build a translation out of that. That would probably be the ultimate translation. So, but the CSB, I haven't gotten one, I haven't done one, and I reached out to them and asked them to send me one so I could review it, and they said no. So, I don't have one to review.
What settings do you use to blur your background?
So essentially this comes down to, your lens, but there are three settings that you're going to see in your camera that are super important, maybe even four. Okay, so, and some of these are with the lens, some of this is with the camera. So one of those numbers is your focal length, which is when you're looking at a lens and you see something like a 50 millimeter or a 70 to 200 or a 24 to 70 or a 16 to 35. Those are your focal lengths. Okay, that basically is the zoom. That's how tight or how wide you're going to be on any given subject. So that's essentially, think of that as your zoom. Okay, then you have your ISO. Your ISO is going to be your light boost. Essentially, it's going to add a little light to your picture. I'm really well lit in here, so I'm running a pretty low ISO. Then you've got your shutter speed, which is how fast the shutter moves to take a picture. With video, you're kind of locked into the shutter speeds that you can use indoors. Outside, it's not as big of a deal because you're dealing with the natural light. But when you're dealing with electronic light, your shutter speed needs to correlate with your frame rate that you're shooting at. Normally, it's about double whatever your frame rate is. So I'm shooting at 24 frame rate. So right now my shutter speed, I believe, is at 140, might be at 150, and sometimes I have to toggle between those two. And then the last one's your aperture. Now your aperture is specifically with your lens, your focal length is specifically with your lens, but your aperture is that f-stop number, that f something. If you have a cinema lens, it's a t something. And essentially the lower that number, the wider the aperture, and the more light that comes into the camera, the more stuff you can blur that's not as far away. So like right now, I could blur, if this wasn't a solid background, I could blur that. Matter of fact, it is a little blurry and you probably just can't tell. But I could blur that if I wanted to, because I have a low aperture. So to get that blurry background, you're probably not going to want to go any higher than f2.8. And when you start getting to f2.8 as a consistent aperture, that's going to be a little bit more expensive of a lens. I think it's worth it. It's worked really well for me. But if you go to prime lenses that only do one focal length, like a 50 millimeter, an 85 millimeter, a 24, 35, if you get one of those, you can get an even lower aperture, which will be like f1.8, f1.4, and some Canon lenses, I think, can even do like f1.2. And that just basically means that something closer to my back could be more blurred out. So I don't have to have as much depth to get that blur effect. But the downside of that is my hands here could be in focus and my hands here could be out of focus. And that little bit of motion, especially for someone who talks with their hands and moves their head, it can be kind of bothersome and troublesome. So f2.8 has worked really, really well for me, and I would highly recommend a lens that does f2.8.
So happy I found someone on YouTube who is spirit-filled. Do you have any teachings on praying in the Spirit or praying in tongues? Do you speak in tongues?
Yes, I do have teachings on that. They are not published. They are in a drawer somewhere that I've done over the years in classrooms and stuff. So eventually I will get into all of that. It really, honestly, one of the hardest things, it's harder than creating new material, is taking old material that's really good and redistributing it through a new, mode. So eventually I'll do that. Now that I'm in the new studio, I'm gonna be able to create more material than I have before. So I'm really, really excited about the studio. I have no idea what that voice was, but it was great. Somebody's gonna put in the comments I'm demon possessed, probably. And then to answer the latter part of your question, yes, I do. And lastly, before I go, I just want to let you know that we do have a new way for you to submit questions, and that's by submitting using your audio. You can talk to me on my website, and all you have to do is go to jasonmayfield.com/question. If you go there, obviously the link's down below. If you go there, you can record your voice and send me the question. And so that's going to help me in the way that I want to edit these in the future. So if you have to send me text, you can, but I'm more likely to ignore you. And I would really prefer you to send me your audio. As always, if you like these kind of videos, make sure that you like, you comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time.